Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. You know what the drill is. We've got our coffee and it is the end of the month, so you guys know what we're doing. We're doing a May reading wrap-up. I keep getting the months confused and I keep wanting to call this my June wrap-up or my March wrap-up. I'm like, both of those are wrong. And honestly, I only read 4 books this month, but that's okay, you know? We don't have to read a ton of books every month, and any amount of books that you read this month, whether it was 1 or even half of a book, is great. So my boyfriend and I were actually talking about how strange it is that in the book community, we set goals to read as many books as possible, but he was like, it's weird because you don't like set goals to watch 40 movies a year or something like that, which I don't know, maybe people do. Like maybe people who are obsessed with films set goals for themselves like that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you do that, but it's just interesting how we make it such an important factor in reading is set a certain goal, which I do it myself. I love doing it. Yeah, it's just an interesting part of the reading community, I guess, which I feel like sometimes it can make people feel like they're not a true reader if they're not reading enough books. We're not about that here. Any amount of books is a good amount of books to be reading every month, and I just like to read as many as possible because I like to be able to talk about as many as possible, and I also just have so many books that I want to read that I want to get through them because, you know, we only have a finite amount of time on this earth, and not to get morbid, but I really want to get through a lot of books before I die. So we started off this month by reading The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I'm probably the last person on the planet to read this book. Some of you are going to be upset with me, but I didn't love it. I liked it. I enjoyed reading it. I love Madeline Miller's writing so much, and a couple years ago I read Circe, and I love Circe. I recommend that book all the time. I think it's amazing. I think it's super underhyped, and this one gets all the attention. So I went into this thinking it was going to be better than Circe, and just personally, it wasn't as impactful to me as it was for a lot of people. You basically know what's going to happen to Achilles. I just felt very removed from the characters. While I didn't like them, I just wasn't super interested in them, and I couldn't figure out why. Basically, I just hated Achilles so much. Our main character I liked, and I was rooting for him, but Achilles is just such a butthead. He's not very nice, and he just takes our main character for granted the whole time. I also felt like I was just watching a bunch of immature boys talk about power and fulfilling a prophecy where they become a god and they become powerful, and just how it destroys them. I mean, I know what that's supposed to be the story, but it just made me angry, I guess. And I also got a little bit bored. Like, I'm not rating this 3 stars just because the characters were annoying, because I do like to read about unlikable characters, but I just felt like the storyline got a little bit boring. And Circe is definitely really slow paced, and it's not a fast paced book by any means. She literally lives isolated on an island, so not a whole lot can happen. There was something about the writing with Circe where I felt like maybe there were just more takeaways from it, more quotable moments from it that I really enjoyed. But regardless, Madeline Miller's writing is very lyrical. I love her writing, but I didn't love it as much in The Song of Achilles as I did in Circe. So I think the redeeming factor in these books, since they are a little bit slower paced, is the way Madeline Miller writes and her lyrical prose, which we get a lot of in Circe, and I have a lot of quotes that I love from that book, but we didn't get that as much in this one, in my opinion. But I know some people adore this book, and I will say I did cry at the end. It was heartbreaking. I really did enjoy the ending, but I feel like the second half of this book up until the end point, I was just really frustrated with the characters. Felt like I was just watching, like I said, to mostly Achilles just being an immature boy who I wanted him to have some sort of redeeming quality about him, and he never did, in my opinion, and it didn't give me what I wanted. And so I'm rating The Song of Achilles 3.5 stars. It wasn't terrible by any means. It's still a great book. It just didn't live up to the hype. So I also read Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, and the reason I read this was because I am trying to read a ton of super popular fantasy enemies to lovers books right now, because if you saw my other video, I just want to have a ton of recommendations for you guys when it comes to this genre, which I don't currently have. So I just was in the mood for some fantasy enemies to lovers, and now I've read quite a few. And I feel like I'm getting a little bit sick of the genre just for the time being, but I have enjoyed every book that I've read so far. And this one was YA, which I didn't know going in, and I feel like I say that a lot. But I go into some books, a lot of books, pretty blind because I just like doing it that way. Like to be surprised. The first part of this book, it was really tough for me to get into it. It felt kind of cheesy, just kind of childish almost, which makes sense. But overall, it was a really fast, easy book to get through. And then the second half, I felt more invested in it. I'm not super attached to the characters yet, but by the very end of this book and kind of the twists that happen, I am gonna read the second book because I really wanna know what happens. And I think the third book in this series comes out sometime this year, if I'm not mistaken. Second book in this series is called The Ballad of Never After, and I'm actually gonna pick that up from the library today. But I'm gonna rate this like 3.5 stars also because it was good. I really enjoyed it. I had fun reading it, but I just feel like it didn't make me feel any sort of way yet. It feels like I could potentially really like the other books in this series, but it was just a little bit cheesy, but it was like kind of just a fun romp. So basically, if you don't know what this book is about, it is about our main character, Evangeline, who is in love with a boy named Luke, but Luke is then marrying her stepsister and she's upset about it for obvious reasons. But she's convinced that Luke is cursed. So she goes to the Prince of Hearts, which in this magical world, he is what is called a fate. So they're kind of like magical fairy people who can like grant you wishes, but they curse you. I don't know really how to explain it. Again, the world building wasn't super strong. You kind of just like jump right into the story and you have to figure out what's going on, which I actually kind of liked that. So she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, whose name is Jax, to basically stop the wedding. But to stop the wedding, he turns everybody to stone because he has granted her the service of stopping the wedding. She now is indebted to him, and the rest of the book follows her trying to fulfill this debt. It feels very young adult is I guess the only reason why it's not super highly rated for me and just a little bit cheesy, but it's still fun. It's still a fun read, and if you like YA, then I would definitely recommend it. If you don't like YA, then I probably wouldn't recommend it. Next up, we have an adult fantasy, and everyone is obsessed with this book right now. I did a full other video on this book, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. If you're interested in my full in-depth thoughts and feelings about this book, then go check out that video. This book was so much fun. It follows our main character, Violet, as she goes into this sort of war college to become a writer. It's enemies to lovers, there are dragons, which is honestly one of the best parts about it. And the second book comes out in November, which I'm so excited for because the plot twist at the end just leaves you needing the next book. Honestly, if you wanted to wait until November to read this so then you can immediately read the second book, then I would maybe recommend doing that, just because then you're not suffering like the rest of us. I rated this 5 stars. So much fun reading this. I think I read it in like a weekend. And then last but certainly not least, this is probably my favorite book that I read this month easily. And I know I'm super late to the game again. This is another super popular book that everybody knows about, and it is called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I feel like this book definitely has elements of enemies to lovers in it in a way that made me love someone that I shouldn't love. And that is a very like small portion of the plot, like basically crumbs. You get a sliver of that in this, but the sliver is so delectable that I can't stop thinking about it. Also, this book is slower paced. It is fantasy, but I would say that the fantasy elements in it are pretty light. Once Upon a Broken Heart honestly reminded me very much of this book. I think this one is better, and just obviously it's not a YA, and it's very slow paced because it's more focused on character development and other themes than just the fantasy aspects. It's definitely not as plot heavy as the other fantasy books I read this month, but the writing in it, incredible. There are so many quotes in here that I adore and will carry with me forever. I loved the characters in this. I loved the bad character in this so much. But anyway, so basically Addie LaRue is going to be forced to marry someone in the 1700s in France. That's where she's born, where she grew up. And she decides to make a deal with the gods so that she doesn't have to go through with this marriage, and she gets to live her life and do whatever she wants essentially. But you know how making deals with gods go. If you don't word it properly, they will scam you. And so basically, she gets to live for as long as she wants. She never ages, but the catch is that no one will ever remember her. So if you see her and you're talking to her and then you turn away from her and she's out of your sight, then you forget who she is and that she ever existed. She can't even write anything. It'll just fade away. She can't say her name. So it follows her over the years. And at the end, like once she's done with her life, then she owes the god that she made the deal with her soul. So she's lonely and it's just her going through literally hundreds of years by herself essentially until finally someone does remember her. And then you're following that plot line and you're getting sort of present day of what's going on, and then you're also getting flashbacks into her past and slowly uncovering what happened in her life. And I just think it was so beautifully done, and it honestly lives rent-free in my head. This book is just so freaking amazing. I love it. I'll never forget reading it. 6 stars, honestly, like 6 stars, okay? Anywho, those are all the books that I read in the month of May. I hope you liked this video, and I hope you got some book recommendations from me, or you just enjoyed our little chat. But I hope to see you guys in my other videos. If not, I would love to see you over on Instagram. I'm way more active over there and I love chatting with you guys. So that will be linked in the description below. Also, let me know your favorite book that you read this month in the comments. And until my next video, I will see you when I see you.